This. All right. Good morning. Welcome to Ann Arbor Real Estate, well, not Ann Arbor Real Estate Investors Club. This is the Bundesen team at Real Estate One. First time home buyers webinar. As mentioned, I've done several of these in the past. This is a new one for 2026 because there's some new rules going around, especially when it regards agency, which I'll talk about in a couple slides shortly. But I encourage you to, grab a notepad and a pencil or pen, and take some notes. I will have a couple handouts at the end that I will put in the chat, but otherwise, let's get going. Um, First off, I like to let people know, who they're dealing with and who's presenting. I work with my wife, Mary. We work as a team, and we've been doing it since 2004, closing in on 1,000 transactions, and we're very fortunate to be among the top 1.5% of realtors nationwide as far as number of transactions in 2025. So we received a company award and all that stuff. That I like to just let you know who you're dealing with. Um, anyway, um, today's session is going to be, fact filled, and just designed to give you a 10,000 foot overview of the home buying process. This is, it's very common knowledge. I mean, it's common knowledge to those of us very active in the industry. But this is this presentation is primarily based on my experience, in working with hundreds of buyers over the years. And what are the most important things to look out for, how to get started, how to get going, kind of what goes on in the real world versus what you might see on social media or whatever. And it will become evident as I go through these slides. But today's session is focused on three really key things. These aren't the only things, but again, today's session is to give you a 10,000 foot overview and a good launch into the home buying process if you've never done it before. So number one, I'm going to talk about building your team, which is important because real estate is a team sport. It's not a solo sport. I mean, you're on your own, you're buying a house for yourself, but you really need a team, and I'll explain about that. Financing, what elements go into that, and that it's not all about getting the best rate. There's a lot of moving parts around the financing piece, especially for first-time home buyers. And then the process of making an offer. And I'm going to touch on, the real world market, which the way it's been in Ann Arbor the last few years anyway. I think the market is shifting a little bit this year. We're still in the beginning of March, so we're at the very front end of the real estate of the prime buying and selling season. So it remains to be seen how the market is going to work this year. But I'll explain a little bit more about that as we go along. All right, so number one, put this at the top of your list, assembling your power team. And my approach to this and my approach to this slide and how I want to explain it to you is that if you're coming in to the real estate market and looking to buy a house, your mind is focused on, getting a house and what kind of a house and how much is it going to cost and how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, what's the design, what condition is it in, where is it located, what are the schools like, where's the shopping, all of those elements. And it's not your first thought of, who you're going to be engaging with to help you through this process. So I kind of want to break this down for you a little bit, um, and help explain it to you So to help you think about it so you can approach it in, a methodical and a systematic and an intelligent way where you're not doing it in a rush, because that's a big mistake a lot of buyers make, not only with buying your personal residence, but with investors. Is I'm really an advocate of being prepared ahead of time before you start, engaging with people who are in the market, because everybody has their own knowledge, their own perspectives, and their own motivations in the interaction of the process, if that makes sense to you. So there are more people involved in a transaction typically than the ones I have listed here. But again, today is just to get you started and to get you thinking about who you are going to engage with in this process. So number one, first and foremost, is the realtor that you are going to work with. And if you're a first time home buyer, I really discourage you from attempting to do it yourself, or saying to yourself, well, I'm not really sure if I'm going to do it, so I don't want to bother anybody, or I don't want to waste anybody's time. I'll talk about agency in the next couple of slides a little bit more in depth, but I want you to engage with a realtor. I'm applying for the job. I work with buyers all the time as well as sellers. I look forward to working with buyers. I enjoy working with first-time home buyers. I'm working with two first-time buyers right at the moment, and I enjoy doing that. And
Mm-hmm.
I, I
Oh, sorry about that. I didn't realize I was unmuted.
okay. I appreciate it if you, yeah. Anyway, engage with your realtor, and so I am gonna, yeah, I'll save it for the next slide about don't just go with the first realtor that you meet, okay? And I'm gonna talk to you about how about vetting a realtor, and then these other three who are on this slide: your lender, your home inspector, a contractor. Maybe you'll need, maybe you won't need. You should have one kind of in the bullpen anyway, whether you need it on your first transaction or not, and your title company. So this all comes back to trust, and your realtor. When if you engage with a realtor who's very knowledgeable in the area, very experienced in the area, and you trust your realtor can make recommendations of these other folks. So you don't necessarily have to independently, find, interview, vet, any of these people individually. What realtors are taught to do and what we're supposed to do is provide provide advice and provide recommendations to more than one person. That's a It's something I'm not crazy about, but it's part of the industry. There's a lot of things in the industry I'm not crazy about, but I have to do anyway, for legal reasons or whatever. But what I do is, when I work with a buyer, we get a property under contract. Okay, it's time for a home inspection. Gee, Brian, I don't know any inspectors. Can you recommend anybody? Well, I've been in business 22 years. I've worked with a lot of inspectors over the years. I know several good ones, some okay ones, some not so good ones. But what I typically do, because I'm required to do, is I provide a list of three or four inspectors. I say, hey, here's a list of four inspectors. I've worked with all of these. They're very good. They work on your behalf, etc. I don't want to go too far off in the weeds on a home inspector, but I'll go off on the weeds a little bit. That be careful about who your realtor recommends as an inspector. Okay, there's kind of two directions this can go, or three directions actually. Three is the direction that you want it to go, that you want an inspector who's very experienced, certified, thorough, a teacher, and like that, because an inspection costs quite a bit of money. So the inspectors I work with are, I call them educating inspectors, is they really enjoy educating the buyer about, the particulars of the house. So that buyer knows a lot about the house. There are inspectors that are great inspectors, they're good at what they do, but they don't like teaching. They go in, they go out, they test everything, and they come out and they write a report, and that's that. And that could be well and good. All right. There are other inspectors who are, fortunately, there's very few of them, but they're really alarmists, where they make, something minor into something major. And I could do a whole session on home inspections, and I've gone far enough in the weeds on this one, but just be careful. Do your due diligence, and that's part of your due diligence process, is doing due diligence on the people you're adding to your team. Okay. So you need a lender, realtor, lender, inspector, contractor, because, for example, when you do a home inspection, the home inspector doesn't know everything. He's not an expert roofer, he's not an expert electrician, he's not an expert plumber. He knows enough to know when there's a problem and when there's an issue, but past that, an inspector is going to say, well, I see this, and this is kind of a red flag or a yellow caution flag, where I'm not so sure about this. This could be a problem. I think you should have a plumber come and take a look at it. I think you should have a foundation guy come and take a look at it. So that's where the contractor comes in. So that's, again, part of the process, that, the inspector will say, I'm not so sure about this electrical system. You ought to have an expert come and take a look at it. So therefore, you go get an expert to come and take a look at it. All right. You get the idea on that. So number one is assembling your team. All right. And, be pro, I'll say this here, and I might say it a few other times as well, as buying a house it's not like buying a pair of shoes. I say this very often. It's a big transaction and a lot of moving parts, and you have to rely on several people who are going to touch this transaction, between the time you initiate it and between, up until closing, and even after closing. All right. So, be proactive. Um, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't think that you're wasting people's time. If you're wasting someone's time, they will tell you, or you will pick up on it pretty quickly. But you're a client, you're making a big transaction. You run the show, really, as far as the buy side of any transaction. So you want to be as proactive as possible. Um, be upfront, do your due diligence, and what I'm trying to teach you today is be a little bit proactive, so you're going to know a little bit more going into the process than you would have without this little hour session. So, your realtor matters. So, here's where I'll talk a little bit about the industry. Being a realtor, it really is a relatively low bar of entry. So, there are a lot of realtor. There are like 1.3 million realtors in the country. Um, there are like 13 or 14,000 realtors in the state of Michigan. Um, and the bar to entry is relatively low. So as you might imagine, and I don't know, whomever's on the call, I don't know what interactions you've had with realtors over the years. But I'm kind of assuming that you're coming into this fresh and that you don't have really any experience with any realtors other than, if you have a cousin who's a realtor, because with 14,000 in the state of Michigan, there's a good chance that you know one. You can fall out of a chair and run into a realtor. But you want someone who's going to represent you, all right? And I don't, when I say representation, I don't mean just checking the boxes and filling out the forms and opening the doors to show you a few properties. All right. You need to think of it in a mindset of a little bit differently, that who you choose to represent you is part of your home buying strategy. So, does that realtor have market knowledge, have knowledge of the local market? And it's really important. And another thing to learn, if you don't know, is that markets are not just local, they are hyper local. Okay. I was just talking to Aaron before we started the session this morning that, I've been in the business 20 years, but I do not know the Detroit market. I'm not comfortable in the Detroit market. And more importantly, I'm not interested in learning about the Detroit market. My wheelhouse is Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti, Washtenaw County, part of Western Wayne, Livingston, that area. And there, believe me, there is enough moving parts in that area that uh, you need a lot of knowledge for. So if you know a realtor from Detroit and they're coming to the Ann Arbor market, well, they're completely different markets. So there are realtors who will say, well, I'm a realtor, I'm based out of Detroit, but I'm licensed anywhere in the state. And they will tell you that they know Ann Arbor. All right. Again, this is an element of trust. There might have been a day when I was new in the business where I would say the same thing, where I would say, yeah, I'm a realtor. I'm licensed in the state of Michigan. I'm not really familiar with Detroit, but I can learn it really quickly and let's go because I'm hungry and I want a commission. I've reached a point in my career, and again, this depends on the realtor you engage with, where I said, look, I know enough to know that I'm not comfortable. And my philosophy as part of my business is that I would rather refer you to a realtor in an area I'm unfamiliar with, where I know you will be taken care of by a realtor who knows that market better than I did. So you are served better by working with him or her than you would be with me. All right. That gets into the tricky thing that, makes additional decisions that you have to make. But again, I circle back to the idea of choosing a realtor who is knowledgeable in the really specific area that you work in, or that you want to buy the house in. Um, Negotiation skills. This is something you will pick up on as you have an interview with your realtor. Your realtor will, likely prattle off all their statistics and all that stuff. But you have to develop your comfort level with, is this realtor going to be an advocate for me? Or is this someone who is just interested in doing whatever it takes to get a sale, whether it's good for me or not? And that's a really big hurdle, in my opinion. And it took me a long time to get over that hurdle because of the natural nature of the business is that you want sales and you want to do what it takes to get a sale. But I've matured enough in my career where I'm an advocate, and it might be a difficult thing for me to do, or not. It's less difficult over time, where I might advise the client, look, this is I'm going to recommend that we walk away from this deal for these reasons. So again, that's a feeling and a vibe that you're going to get from the realtor that you work with. And I encourage you to, talk to a lot of different talk to different realtors, because with a million of them, literally a million of them, um, everyone has a little different approach. Everyone has a little different skill set. Everyone has a little different motivations. And you're ultimately dealing with people. So that is an important key. Um, so who you choose is a strategy, and how you choose them. Do they have market knowledge? Do they have good negotiating skills? You know, I practice my negotiating skills. I learn about negotiating. I teach about negotiating. So negotiating is a science in and of itself. Um, Contracts and risk protections. How well does your realtor know the contracts, know what the potential risks are? Um, I'm an advocate of, exploring all options. What's the worst that can happen? What's the best that can happen, on the bookends? And then let's play out these options and scenarios in between these two extreme options. So your realtor matters. So write that on your little sheet of paper and put a star by it. And so now here's another tricky part, is the Michigan Buyer Agency Agreement. I'm not sure who, I'm assuming everyone on the call, or most everyone on the call, is from Michigan, but there might be others from other areas. So the key is to become aware of the agency agreement, because it's a national thing, but every state does it a little bit differently. Every brokerage does it a little bit differently. And every agent does it a little bit differently. But this is what is supposed to happen. And this is, one of the other things about the industry that irks me a little bit is that we have a lot of lawyers who tell us how we have to do business. And it is what it is. I could elaborate on that, but I won't. That's not for today. But anyway, in Michigan, we have this buyer agency agreement and agency disclosure. There's these two documents, which I will give you a copy of the Real Estate One version of it in the chat at the end of the class. But not technically, legally, realtors are required to talk about an agency agreement in the first conversation that we have with a potential buyer. And this makes things really challenging for realtors, and it makes things really confusing and intimidating for potential buyers, because here's how it works is, you're thinking about buying a house, you haven't engaged with a realtor yet up front, or you haven't engaged with a lender yet up front, but you see something on Zillow, or you see a for sale sign or an open house sign, or you see something online, you say, wow, that house is really nice, I'd like to go see it. And you either, this is typically how it would happen. You would walk into an open house and you'd greet the realtor who's at the door, who may or may not be the listing agent. It usually is, but it may or may not, it may be an associate of the listing agent who's fishing for buyers. We'll talk about that. Or you call up off a Zillow, and you think you're getting the listing agent, which you may be getting, or you more likely are not getting. You're more likely getting an agent who has paid to have their phone number pop up when you call on a property. But I'll get into that in another slide. So that's typically how you start the engagement process with a realtor. And now, with this national ruling by the National Association of Realtors, the realtor is supposed to say, not even, hello, my name is Brian, what's your name? Okay. Before you get to say your name or I get to say my name, I'm supposed to trot out this contract that I'm going to ask you to sign, and I haven't even met you and I don't know your name. But the lawyers don't care about that. Because they don't think about the business end of it. They think about the legal end of it. So what I'm teaching you today is not to disarm you, but to give you the knowledge about what that is. So when you engage with a realtor and a realtor starts talking about an agency agreement, you'll know what they're talking about. You can say, "Oh yeah, I know about that." Because otherwise, you don't know. You don't know what you don't know, and you don't know stepping into this process what you're involved in engaging with until you engage with it. But it's very frustrating for a realtor to have to introduce paperwork and a contract and a commitment when we haven't even met. I don't even know your name. I don't know if I'm going to like you, and what you're asking me to sign a contract. No, of course I'm not going to sign anything. I don't trust you, and I'm not going to trust you if the first thing you're doing is shoving paperwork in front of me. So that's my little editorial about it. But I'm educating you about what this agreement is and is not. So you're ideally you're going to be no longer intimidated, after I'm done in the next several minutes. So I'm not going to go through a chapter and verse. I'll let you read it on your own. But in essence, there are two documents that a realtor is going to ask you to sign up front, very early on in the process. And if they don't, they are in violation of this rule, but they will ask you to sign this document sooner or later and prior to writing a contract at the latest. But at some point between the time you shake hands or pick up the phone and the time that you're writing an offer on a property, you will have you don't have to do anything, but you're supposed to sign this agency disclosure. And an agency disclosure is a document that discloses what the agency relationship is. And then an agency contract, which is where you, as the buyer, say, "Yes, I, Mr. or Mrs. Buyer, am hiring so and so realtor." All right, that's the agency agreement. Okay, so know what you're signing. So you're going to know it because you're going to have this up front, in the next few minutes. What it does is it's a lot of legalese, as all of these contracts are, but it clarifies the duties of the realtor. It also clarifies what the expectations of you are, you, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, in this relationship. All right. And that's doing things and not doing certain things, which I'll talk about. But the key component, which is in bold here, is compensation. And this is where a lot of the confusion comes in, and it's what prompted the whole lawsuit in the beginning, um, is compensation. So when it's all boiled down to, in essence, in a real estate transaction, it has just been customary for for a couple of generations anyway, not that long, but that the seller pays the entire compensation in a transaction. So let me try and explain that simply and quickly. Where uh, I go to list a property, and in the listing agreement, we talk about the price, we talk about the length of the contract, we talk about the terms that the seller will accept as part of the sale. And then, as part of that contract, is compensation to the realtors who are involved in the transaction. So typically there are two realtors in the transaction: the realtor who represents the seller and the realtor who represents the buyer. So in that listing agreement, the seller who's selling his or her house agrees to pay either his realtor and the buyer's realtor. That's just customary. All right. So what this relatively new law, it's a year old now. What it says is that this it's not a given that the seller is going to pay the buyer's agent. Okay, it's not a given like it used to be prior to this agreement. That it really wasn't a given, but it was implied that it was a given. That was what created the lawsuit. So now it's just pointed out and clarified, and it wants to make sure that both the seller and the buyer understand what each agent is being paid and who is paying that agent. Okay. And that's the part that is negotiable. It's part of the negotiation of the contract, the same way price is, the same way closing date is, the same way, what items are left in the property and what are not left in the property, the same way the closing date is negotiated, the same way all those elements are negotiated. The agent compensation for the seller's agent and the buyer's agent, that's part of the negotiation of any transaction. Okay. So I'm going through a situation right now. I'm talking with a seller, and the seller does not want to pay a buyer's agent. Okay. And that's perfectly fine. Again, it's part of the negotiation. It's the seller's prerogative. Okay. Because each contract is between a seller and a buyer. It's not just a blanket thing. So I hope this is making sense to you. So what the purchase agreement spells out, I'm not going to give you a copy of the purchase agreement today. That's the subject of another webinar, or I have a YouTube video on contracts that I go through the purchase agreement. But for purposes of today, you need to know this. And you as a buyer, you're going to say, again, in reality is different from theory, but you as a buyer are going to say, well, you can do whatever you want to do, again, because everything is negotiable. But if you find a house, okay, you see a house and you like the house and you're ready to write an offer on the house, now you're going to roll up your sleeves and put pen to paper. And your realtor says, well, by the way, this seller is not going to pay your agent's commission. You're going to have to come up with that out of pocket. Okay. That's part of the negotiation. Are you going to do that? Are you willing to do that? Or are you not willing to do that? Likely scenario in first time home buyer, you're unable to do that. You're not can't come up with another $5,000 out of pocket up front, like you have to come up with the down payment and inspection fees and all that. That's why that's the reason that the whole commission is baked into the seller's agreement, if this makes sense to you. I hope I'm explaining this well. All right. That the commission gets baked into the sales price. All right. And if the seller says, absolutely not, I'm not paying the buyer's agent. You guys got to figure that out on your own. Okay. Now you as the buyer, you have to make the decision. You have to say, oh, well, okay, I'm going to come up with another $5,000 to pay my agent or whatever the amount you negotiate. Or you're going to say, okay, Mr. Seller, I get it. You're not going to pay my agent, but therefore I'm going to deduct $5,000 off of my offer accordingly, because all these all these comps and the sales price, and we talk about negotiating that at a different point. All the comps are based on commissions being baked into that sale. So the full commission is calculated as part of the value of that house. But if you, Mr. Seller, are not going to agree to that, well, I'm just going to deduct that. I'm just going to deduct that off my offer. Okay. Then that's usually when the sellers see the light and say, "Oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. That I'm not saving any money by not paying this commission." Um, and again, this will be moving parts. If the house is really hot and there's multiple offers and things like that, that's a different scenario. But I'm just talking about the principle of it today. Um, and that's it. So that needs if I'm representing a buyer, that's my negotiating strategy. I would say, hey, Mr. Buyer, do you really like this house or not? Okay, there's no other offers we're competing with. Seller does not want to pay the commission for a buyer's agent. If you want it, let's deduct the commission off our offer price and go from there. All right, that's one strategy. But in reality, if I'm representing the seller and the seller says, Brian, I'm not going to pay a buyer's agent, I'm going to be upfront with that seller and try and have a come to Jesus meeting and say, if you're not going to pay a buyer's agent, then a buyer's agent is not going to present this property to their buyer. Simple. All right. Uh, Pure and simple. So I know I kind of went around and around on this, but the gist of this slide is know what you're signing. The representation means, um, what you're responsible for doing, what your agent is responsible for doing, who gets paid, what the realtors in the transaction, how much do they get paid, and who pays them? Is that's basically what is spelled out in the agency agreement. Also know this, because I'm personally I'm very wary of signing anything like anybody is, especially I don't know the person, I haven't looked at the contract. It's like, software user agreements. You slide down and you're in the heat of a transaction, so you sign it. So I'm telling you to be a little bit proactive about it, and know what you're signing. But also know this, here's a key, is you can put a star by this one, is there is always an out in the agency agreement. All right. You're going to be asked to sign an agency agreement for a certain period of time. Again, it's negotiable. You can say, okay, Brian, I just met you. I get it. I understand about agency. I understand the legal obligation. And I know you got to do what you got to do. I will sign this agreement for you, but I'm only going to sign it for 7 days, or I'm going to sign it for 30 days, or I'm going to sign it for 2 days, or I'll sign it for 9 months. Whatever it is, you're calling the shots. The agent might tell you, oh, well, you can't do this or you can't. No, you can do that. You can do that. And on top of that, there's a clause in there. I don't know if it's paragraph 26 or 34 or whatever it is in there, that if you sign a buyer's agency with any realtor, if you sign a buyer's agency agreement with me, if you sign it today, there's a provision in the agreement. You can see it when I give it to you. That this agreement can be terminated with written notice. Okay, which means that, I mean, I don't do this, but I'm going to use myself as an example. You sign an agreement with me today. It's March 7th. I say, okay, we've signed an agreement for 30 days or 90 days or whatever it is. And then I ghost you. Okay. And you're texting me, you're calling me, you're sending me properties. Hey, Brian, let's go look at these properties. And you don't hear from me. Okay. And you say, oh crap, well, I've got a contract with this guy and he's not calling me. All right. It's not going to happen with me, but it does happen with other realtors. And it has happened because I work with buyers who said, I've been working with this guy and he ghosted me. So it happens, but that's why it's be careful who you choose. But the number one thing I would do as a buyer is I would call up that agent's broker if he hasn't, if you've left multiple messages and no callback. I mean, there may be a valid reason. You may have had an accident or a family situation. You don't know. You don't know what you don't know, or they may just have blown you off. You never know the situation. You can contact that agent's brokerage, Real Estate One in my case, Keller Williams, Century 21, Remax, whatever. Call up the office. Can I speak to the manager? Hey, Mr. Manager, I signed a contract with Brian and he's ghosted me. What do I do? I'd like to break the contract. That manager would like to salvage you as a client and refer you to someone else. But you can say, no, I don't want anything to do with this guy. I don't want anything to do with Real Estate One. You write an email to the agent, write an email to the agent's broker. And the broker's name is on the contract too, saying, I would like to terminate this. Please take this email as notice of termination of this agency agreement dated such and such, effective today, blah, blah, blah. That's it. Then, yeah, if you could hang on to the question, I will answer it at the end because I'm trying to get through here. But I will answer your question in a minute. Your home search. Uh, so, yeah, so here we go on the home search part of it. Typically, you're going to engage with your realtor. Your realtor will send you a list of properties that are on the market uh, currently, based on your search parameters: geography, price, style, age, condition, those type of things. But the agent should not be doing that if there's not an agency agreement in place. But we can get into that another time. Zillow and aggregators. So I alluded to this in a couple slides ago, is that if you go on Zillow or if you go on any of these other, I call them aggregators, which are Michigan Homes, Trulia, Realtor.com, Homes.com, all of those are what I call aggregators, which means they collect information from the 200 different multiple list services around the country. They collect all that data and then spit it back out through their platform. All right. And the agent you're going to engage with, if if you fill out one of those contact forms, is either going to be the listing agent, or it's going to be whatever agent has paid that aggregator to have their name and number pop up. All right. So because that's what all these aggregators are, in my opinion, they're not home selling sites. They're lead generation sites for realtors. All right. So if you go on to Zillow and you see a property in Ann Arbor, and then you fill out that form, yes, I'm interested in taking a look at this property. It could go to a realtor, a random realtor out of Detroit, just because that realtor happens to have paid Zillow to get into the rotation. All right. So that doesn't mean that realtor knows anything about the local market, is a good negotiator, blah, blah, blah. But you're a buyer, you don't know what you don't know. So you assume, oh, this person, you most naive buyers assume that whatever agent they connect with is the listing agent, so knows more about the property than anybody else. Okay. But that, again, that's not necessarily the case, number one. Number two, if they are the listing agent, yeah, they know more about the listing than anybody else. But guess what? That listing agent is hired by the seller to get the best price for the seller. That's what their contract specifies. So if they're going to engage with you, the buyer, guess what? They don't represent your best interest. They represent the best interest of the seller. That's their job. All right. That's why you need a buyer's agent who's going to represent your best interest. Okay. That's the long and the short of Zillow and all these other aggregators. For sale by owner and off market deals. Okay. If you if you have, a proactive and aggressive buyer's agent, you know, maybe the property you want is not on the multiple list service. Maybe you want a specific type of property in a specific area. Or maybe there's a property that's not in the multiple list service that you've seen a for sale sign for. Your buyer's agent can go after those on your behalf. I'm doing it for a client right now where I'm blanketing a neighborhood where my client says, Brian, I would like to live in this neighborhood. There's nothing on the market about it. So what I'm doing as his agent is I'm sending letters to the owners of those properties that are not on the market. Say, hey, Mr. Seller, I'm working with a buyer who's seriously interested in moving into this neighborhood. Would you consider buying and can we have a discussion? Okay, that's your buyer's agent working for you on your behalf. Okay, so those are the different ways, three different basic ways of home searching. All right. Number two, your lender partner. Um, and as I say, if you take home buyer classes or webinars or books or videos or whatever, um, they will all tell you, get your lender first or get your realtor first. It's kind of chicken or the egg, whether you get your realtor first or your lender first. I've seen it done both. It's done both ways, so it's whatever you're comfortable with. But if you're getting serious about the prospect, what I would do if I'm a first time buyer, well, I would engage with a realtor. I would talk to the realtor or a few different realtors till I find the one I'm most comfortable with. Go with him or her and say, hey, do you have a lender? And he or she will likely have a bunch of lenders. And they will have preferred lenders, which is good. And you would want to talk to them. But if I, because the lending piece of it, there's so many different moving parts. I would also start naively, not naively, but wanting to learn. Start with your own bank, where you do your banking, where you have your checking account right now, where you have your savings account. Walk in and say, I'm beginning to start. I'm beginning the process of buying my first home. Can I talk to someone in your home lending department? And you want to have that conversation, and you can use that conversation to compare with the other mortgage people that your realtor is going to connect you with. So you have a baseline, or, they may or may not have the best deal. I have found, you know, personally that it's better to work with a local lender, a local bank like Bank of Ann Arbor or Old National Bank or Arbor Bank or one of those rather than Chase or Fifth Third or whatever. Those are all good and great, but here's where you want to do some shopping and you want to do some compare and contrast. In the lending world, there's a little bit more competition. There's competition in anywhere, but you want to become educated. You don't know anything, so you're a sponge. So what can your bank tell you? You want to give them a shot. They want to keep your business. If you're going to go to another, they don't want you to go to another bank to get a loan. Okay, so there's a little competition about there. Um, they will educate you on these items like pre-qualification, pre-approval, what type of credit score you need, what down payment options are there. There's a lot of incentives that come and go for first-time home buyers that really, uh, the lenders want to kind of bend over backwards as much as they can to help out first-time home buyers because number one, it's good for them to build a lifelong customer or client. And number two, it's part of good, PR for the banks, where the banks can do their marketing and advertising and say how much they help, first time home buyers get into the game. But this is an educational process with your lender. Don't rely on your realtor to be telling you about what the interest rates are and what programs are out there. I might know, and I do know because I'm in the market every day, but I only know a small amount where your lender knows the whole bigger picture. And that's why I value the part of the team where, look, I'm going to hand this off to my lender because he knows every little quarter tick of the Fed rate or whatever it is, whenever it happens. And he's the expert. So I defer to the expert on your team in that area. All right. Again, it gets to the personality of your realtor who will claim maybe they do know, but I know enough that I can't know everything about the lending business and know everything I need to know about being a realtor at the same time. It's just too much. It's just too much information. So again, it's key to have a good lender, to trust your lender, for the whole package. And it's not always about the rate. Um, Again, a different discussion for a different day. How to choose a lender? Similar to choosing a realtor. Talk to a few of them, get your comfort level, and your trust level. Um, how well do they communicate? It's critical for a realtor, but I won't say it's more critical, but it's very critical for a lender because these rates, the rates fluctuate and there are rate locks when you get a pre-approval, and there are all these moving parts that the circumstances can change based on the time period you're engaging in the process, if that makes any sense to you. Again, what's the local market experience? All right. And what that means to me in my 22 years of experience, that means that a lender like a credit union or like Bank of Ann Arbor, Old National Bank, where they're here, they've been in the Ann Arbor market for 100 and however many years. They really know the market, so they know the value of the property. So what that means is they have the ability to be a little bit more lenient, if you've got dings on your credit report or if your score is not as stellar as it would need to be if you were submitting that application to Chase. You're going to submit a mortgage application through Chase. What are they going to do? They're going to send it to an underwriter in Dallas who, what the hell does that guy know about the Ann Arbor market if he's got 500 files sitting on his desk from around the country? He's going to say, oh, well, what's the credit score? Oh, okay, forget it. That's that's why I recommend choosing a local lender. Are they transparent about fees, options? Again, being upfront, being proactive, because you don't want to be surprised, because there are enough surprises in a transaction anyway, that you want the fewest number of surprises. You'll never eliminate all of them because there's always some curveball that comes in um, out of left field that you never can imagine. And you say, oh, geez, I've never seen that before. Hey, I've been in the business 20 years. I work with a lender. You've been in the business 20 years. Have you ever seen that before? No, I've never seen that before. I've never seen it before. That stuff still happens. I don't know how it happens, but that's one of the fun things about this business. Making smart offers, excuse me. Um, Winning without overpaying, multiple offers, pricing strategy, strong terms matter, inspection and appraisal planning. So I mentioned in a couple earlier slides, um, we've been in a seller's market for at least the last 3 years, a really frenzied seller's market, especially in the springtime, which is this time of year. I'm still a wait and see on what 2026 is going to be. I think it's not going to be the seller's market that it's been the last few years, but I can't. If I could really predict the future, I'd pick lottery numbers, but I can't do that. But I can kind of, in general, get a gut about it. The last few years, you might see. I've seen I've seen properties in the last, they're like literally 50 or 60 offers on a house. That is just a frenzy crazy. And I'm telling you, I think that a lot of people that bought houses who were the winning bids out of 50 bids are sitting on their porch today with a cup of coffee saying, crap, I overpaid for this thing. So you got to be careful of that. But here's the key takeaway for this slide is that I want you to have your multiple offer strategy going in before the key goes in the door of you looking at a house for the first time. I want you to have in mind what you're going to do if you fall in love with this house and you want to write an offer and you're competing with multiple offers. What are you going to do? Don't wait until you're in the frenzy, because this is what happens all the time is you get into it and you get in the frenzy and you see that there are multiple offers and you start to doubt yourself and you say, "Oh man, all these other people think this house is worth such and such more than the asking price. I better offer more too because they must know more than I do." Okay? That's not the way I recommend doing it. Obviously, you can do whatever you want to do. You can overpay. I've had clients overpay and against my advice. People are going to do what they're going to do. You're going to do what you're going to do. But I want you to decide what you're going to do going in. And you might go in saying, "Hey, my keys in the door. I already know. I love this house. I have to have this house." Okay, that's your strategy. But I want you to go in and I want you to ask yourself the question. You're going to do your due diligence. You're going to do your analysis of the value of the property. Your realtor is going to tell you the value. Your lender is going to tell you what he thinks the value is. The appraiser is certainly going to tell you what he or she thinks the value is. And what the appraiser says is going to be like the gospel. Okay. So you may offer $50,000 above the asking price, and whatever the appraiser says, you might have to put into your offer. This was a common clause, is that I will pay the difference between the appraised price and the contract price. Okay. That's part of your strategy. Are you going to do that? Are you willing to come out of pocket and pay more than what the appraiser says it's worth? Okay. That's your decision. I have clients who say, yes, I have lots of clients who've done it. I have lots of clients who say, I'm not paying a dollar more. I'll pay what the appraiser says, even if it's more than what the list price was, but I'm not going to pay more than what the appraiser says. All right. This is what I'm telling you to do is have that strategy. You can always change, but be proactive, have that going in. But I have clients ask me all the time because how often do you buy a house? You don't do it. So you're going to rely on the advice of your realtor. You trust him or her. Brian, should I pay this price? Or should I not pay this price? And what other realtor there I mean, again, there are other realtors who will tell you, "Oh, you're getting a great deal. Oh, you're going to make a lot." There are a lot of realtors who have no qualms about spending your money. I really, really do not like spending other people's money. Okay. Because again, I don't want to tell you, yeah, you should spend $50,000 more than the appraised price on this because you're going to make it up in however many number of years. And then a year from now, you're sitting on the deck with a cup of coffee and you're seeing what the market's doing. And you're going to say, that so and so Brian told me to buy this house. Okay. I'm not going to do that. All right. That's perhaps to the detriment of my business, but that allows me to sleep at night. That's the way I do it. So what I tell my clients is when it comes to having a pricing strategy and we're in multiple offer situations, which has been the most common in the last few years. I'm not in any of those right now because I think the market's flattened out a little bit. But I want you as the buyer to pick a number where you say, look, I'm picking this number. Yeah, this was my one of my most recent sales that from a couple months ago, where we did this. I say, hey, Mark, look. He says, what should I do? What would you do if you were me? I said, look, I can't spend your money. All right, I can't do that. So what I want you to do is I want you to pick a number where if you lose the house to another bidder, you don't regret it. Or if you get the house, you're not going to regret what you paid. All right. You're the only one that can answer that question. I can't answer that question for you. So that's my advice to my clients. And I do, if you were my client and we were in the situation, this is what I would say. And this is what I would think that a good agent would say. Okay. But no, there are agents. I mean, obviously, there's a million agents. There are agents that, you know, are really hungry, don't do a lot of deals. They want to do whatever they can do to get to the closing table because they don't pay unless it gets closed. So they're going to tell you, yeah, 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 get it. You'll do fine. Don't worry about it. Guess what? You've gone to the closing, they've gotten paid, and you don't hear from them again. You get the idea? All right. Strong terms matter. All right. So that means that there are situations where it's not only the price that's the critical factor. It's obviously probably the most important factor, but it's not the only factor. You know what I mean? If you're flexible with the closing, if you're willing to work with the seller's timeline as far as the closing, if you don't have to have the house on a certain date, those type of things, timing, appraisals, inspections, there are all these elements that come in. You say, yes, I'm going to have a home inspection, but I'm not going to ask for, every little nick to be fixed or every little, if the sliding door lock is broken, I'm not going to ask for that to be fixed. I'm only going to ask for something major that the inspector's going to find that I can't see on my viewing of it, that type of thing. So that's the inspection strategy, and that's part of the due diligence, which is part of the negotiation after the contract, which is not today's subject. And again, planning for the appraisal. You hope for the best, plan for the worst. Whatever price is agreed to on the contract, it gets handed off to a neutral third party, which is the appraiser. The appraiser assigns the value of the property, and everybody waits, for him, like the oracle to decide what the property is worth. Ideally, the appraiser gets a value that's more than what the sales price is, but it could be anywhere, and that's kind of like the dark side of the moon, where you don't know until you know. But plan for those contingencies ahead of time, saying, all right, well, what am I going to do? You know, if the appraisal comes in higher than you're buying it for, you know, everybody's giving high fives. If it comes in, at the sales price, all right, you're good. And you have the confidence that you're not overpaying. All right. But if the value comes in lower than what you've agreed to pay, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And do work with your team again, but do what you want to do and do what you're going to do. From contract to closing, and I apologize, I'm going a little bit longer than I planned. So, from the time you put pen to paper on the purchase agreement until the closing, that's what's called the due diligence period. All right. Because this is where you now have control of the property as the buyer. So, and you're going to be paying a literal hard money out of pocket now. All right. For a home inspection, for an appraisal. If you need contractors in, you might have to pay for a contractor to come and give an estimate. That's real money out of pocket. So, but you have control of the property which means the seller can't sell it to somebody else out from under you after you've outlaid some of your hard-earned money. These are things to put on your radar screen and be aware. What happens during the due diligence period? Your realtor will spell this all out up front, hopefully before the offer gets signed. But again, who's going to be the inspector? What do we think? We've examined the seller's disclosure statement, all this and stuff. And how are we going to negotiate based on what we find off this? Those are the elements that you're going to come into play. Appraisal and loan underwriting, I think I just covered that in the last slide. And then after the appraisal, after the loan underwriting, then we have what's called clear to close, which is realtors and buyers' favorite words. And then you get to closing day, where you sign your life away. Everybody exchanges presents and takes pictures and posts them on Facebook and all that fun stuff. And then you're off to the races. But just again, for today's purposes, know that the period on the purchase agreement, from the time an offer is signed by both parties until the closing, that's the due diligence period. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's where the highest stress comes in, because there's a lot of frenzied back and forth among all the parties. But be prepared for it. Be prepared for it as best you can. All right. Next steps. Confidence comes from action. You have to start the ball rolling somewhere. When you're ready, or even if you're not ready, next time you go into your bank, I go into my bank, whatever, a couple days a week. I don't do everything online because I like interacting at the bank, because, if you want to do business, you can't do it all online, or it's not the way I choose to do it. You want to deal with real people who, want to deal with you. Um, Talk to your bank. Just say, hey, I took this webinar over the weekend about a first-time home buyer. I'm starting to get serious about it. I may not buy, I'm ready to buy now, or I might not be ready to buy for a year, but I want to get the ball rolling. They'd love to sit down with you at your bank. Can I talk to someone from your mortgage department? And you get the ball rolling. Or you contact a realtor, a guy like me, or someone else you may have interacted with, or talk to your friends. Not that I want to refer you to someone else. I'd rather you work with me, but I'm going to do it. So, talk to your friends, people you've known who bought houses. Hey, Joe, your sister just bought a house. Oh, hey, you just bought a house. How was who did you work with? How were they? Did you get along? Did they do a good job? You're you're taking action, even though it's small. And again, don't think you're wasting people's time, because this is part of the business. This is part of our business. And does every conversation I have turn into a sale? No, not by any means. But I understand that that's part of the business. And like I say, I like to consider myself an educating realtor. So whether it's today, whether it's 5 years from now, maybe the day will come where you will engage with me, or you will refer someone to me, or whatever. Start building your power team, and again, you do that by your network, by the network you currently have, or being proactive in engaging with your network. And again, if you walk into your bank and say, "Can I talk to someone from your lending department?" There's no doubt, I have no doubt that they would have realtors that they'd be happy to refer you to, because realtors are a dime a dozen, but good realtors are not a dime a dozen. Here's a phone number to schedule a strategy call if you want. That's my phone number. All right. Um, yeah, that's it. That's what I've got for today. And let me um, stop the record. Bethany. Oh, hi.
Hi, I changed